Hello, everyone. Today we will talk about a very famous and old path. It is called the Silk Road. This was not just one road, it was many paths, connecting different parts of the world. It was a very important way for people, goods, and ideas to travel for many, many years. This story is about adventure, discovery, and how different cultures met. We will learn about the people who traveled on this path. We will see what they traded, and we will understand how it changed the world. This story is perfect if you want to practice listening to English. Listen carefully to learn about this amazing old path. Part 1. What was the Silk Road? More than just one road. Let's start by understanding what the Silk Road was. When you hear road, you might think of one wide path that cars use today. But the Silk Road was very different. It was not just one road. It was a big network of many paths. Imagine many small roads and trails. They went in different directions, but they all connected together. They stretched over very long distances. These paths connected the East and the West. The East mainly means China and other parts of Asia. The West mainly means Europe and parts of the Middle East. So, the Silk Road was like a bridge between these two big parts of the world. It helped people from different lands meet each other. The name Silk Road makes us think of silk. Silk is a beautiful, soft cloth. It was made in China. For a long time, only China knew how to make silk. So, silk was very special and very expensive in other parts of the world, like Europe. People in Europe loved Chinese silk very much. It was a very important product that traveled on these paths. Because silk was so famous and important for trade, people started calling all these paths the Silk Road. But the Silk Road was much more than just silk. Many other things traveled on these paths. People traded goods like spices for cooking, gold, silver, glass, tea, and even horses. These goods were carried by people, by animals like camels, or by boats. It was a very old way of doing international business. The Silk Road was active for a very long time. It started more than 2,000 years ago, around 130 BC. It was used for about 1,600 years, until around the 15th century AD. Think about that. Over 1,600 years. Many, many generations of people used these paths. This long history shows how important it was for the world. The paths went over many different kinds of land. They went over very high mountains. They went through very hot deserts. They went across wide grasslands. And some paths were even on the sea, by boats, connecting different ports. So, traders had to be very brave and strong to travel on the Silk Road. The weather was often bad, and the journey was long and dangerous. The main idea of the Silk Road was to exchange things. It was about trade. But it was not just about buying and selling. It was also about exchanging ideas, cultures, and knowledge. When people from different lands met, they learned from each other. They shared their languages, their religions, their art, and their ways of life. So, the Silk Road was a path of friendship and learning, not just trade. It helped many different groups of people connect. It brought people from China, India, Persia, now Iran, Arabia, Rome, and many other places together. This made the world a more connected place, even thousands of years ago. It shows how people have always wanted to explore and meet others. Part 2. Who traveled on the Silk Road? Brave people and their animals. On the Silk Road, many different kinds of people traveled. They all had different reasons to go on these long and hard journeys. It was not easy to travel on the Silk Road. People had to be very brave, very strong, and very patient. One very important group of travelers was the merchants or traders. These were people who bought and sold goods. They wanted to take special things from one place and sell them in another place for more money. They carried beautiful silk from China to Europe. They carried rich spices from India to the Middle East. And they carried gold, silver, or glass from the west to the east. They moved valuable things across many lands. These merchants often traveled in caravans. A caravan is a group of people and animals traveling together. It was safer to travel in a big group. Why? Because the paths were dangerous. There could be robbers who wanted to steal their goods, or there could be wild animals. Also, the weather was very hard. Traveling in a group helped them protect each other. It also helped them share food and water. The most important animals on the Silk Road were camels. Camels are amazing animals for desert travel. They can walk for many days without much water. They can carry very heavy loads on their backs. They have wide feet that help them walk on sand. So, merchants used camels to carry their goods through hot, dry deserts. They sometimes used horses in other parts, especially where the land was not sand. Besides merchants, there were other important people on the Silk Road. Soldiers. They sometimes traveled to protect the merchants and their goods. Rulers wanted the trade to be safe so their lands could get rich. Monks and religious people. They traveled to spread their religions. For example, Buddhist monks from India traveled to China to share their ideas about Buddhism. They built temples and taught people along the way. This helped new religions grow in new lands. Explorers. These were people who wanted to see new places and learn new things. They wanted to discover more about the world. They wrote about the lands, people, and things they saw. One very famous explorer was Marco Polo from Italy. He traveled to China in the 13th century. He lived there for many years and then wrote a famous book about his travels. His book made many Europeans want to learn more about China. Artists and craftsmen. They traveled to share their skills and art. They brought new ideas about painting, music, and making beautiful things to different cultures. For example, Chinese paper-making ideas traveled to the West. The journey on the Silk Road was very, very long. It could take many months, or even a year, to travel from one end to the other. People did not usually travel the whole way themselves. Instead, goods were often passed from one merchant to another. So, silk from China might be bought by a merchant in Central Asia, then sold to another merchant in Persia, who then sold it to a merchant in Europe. It was like a long relay race for goods. Along the paths, there were important stops called caravanserais. These were like old hotels or rest stops for travelers. They had water, food, and safe places for people and animals to rest. They were often like small forts with strong walls to protect against robbers. These caravanserais were very important because they allowed people to stop, trade, and prepare for the next part of their long journey. They were like small towns growing along the main paths. So, the Silk Road was full of different people, each with their own goals. They faced many dangers, but they were brave. They helped connect the world and share many wonderful things. Part 3. What traveled on the Silk Road? Goods, ideas, and more. The Silk Road was like a giant highway of its time, but it carried much more than just cars. It carried many different kinds of things, not only goods, but also ideas, knowledge, and even sicknesses. This exchange changed the world in big ways. Of course, the most famous thing was silk. China made the best silk. It was a secret for a long time. People in Europe loved silk clothes because they were soft, beautiful, and expensive. Only rich people could buy silk, so silk was a very important product that went from east to west. It gave the road its name. But many other valuable goods also traveled. From east, China, India, to west, Europe, Middle East. Spices, things like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. These were very important for making food taste better, especially in Europe. They were also used for medicine. Tea. This drink first came from China. It traveled to other parts of Asia and then later to Europe. Porcelain, fine china. Beautiful, strong cups and plates from China. Paper. The idea of making paper started in China and then moved to the West, changing how people wrote and kept records. Gunpowder. This important discovery from China later changed how wars were fought around the world. Medicines and herbs, special plants, and old knowledge for healing people. Gems and precious stones, beautiful jewels. From West, Europe, Middle East, to East, China. Gold and silver. These metals were very valuable. People in China wanted them. Glass. Beautiful glass products were made in the Middle East and Rome. Horses. Strong horses from Central Asia were very important for armies in China. Grapes, for wine, and other fruits. New kinds of food plants traveled this way. Wool and linen textiles, different kinds of cloth. More than just goods, ideas and knowledge also traveled in the Silk Road. This was perhaps the most important thing. Religion. One of the biggest ideas to spread was Buddhism. It started in India and slowly moved along the Silk Road to China, Korea, and Japan. Monks traveled, built temples, and taught people. Islam also spread from the Middle East to Central Asia and parts of China. Art and architecture. Artists saw new styles and learned new ways to build and decorate. For example, Buddhist art in China has some ideas from Indian and Greek art. Science and technology. Ideas about stars, numbers, and how to make things, like paper making or irrigation systems for water, traveled. China's inventions like the compass and printing also slowly reached the West. Music and dance. New musical instruments and dance styles were shared between different cultures. Sadly, not only good things traveled on the Silk Road. Diseases also moved along these paths. For example, the Black Death, a very bad sickness, traveled from Asia to Europe along trade routes since the 14th century. It killed many, many people. This shows that the connection of the Silk Road could also bring bad things along with good ones. The exchange of goods and ideas on the Silk Road changed the world. It made different cultures richer. It helped new technologies grow. It spread religions. It created a more connected world long before modern travel. It helped people understand that there were many different ways of life and many different things to learn. Part 4. Life on the Silk Road, Hardships and Wonders. Life on the Silk Road was full of hardships. It was not an easy trip. Travelers faced many dangers and challenges every day. But it was also full of wonders. They saw new places, met new people, and experienced amazing things. One of the biggest hardships was the long journey itself. Imagine walking or riding camels for months or even a year. It was very tiring. People had to walk through different types of land, each with its own problems. Deserts, like the Taklamakan Desert in China. These places were very hot during the day and very cold at night. There was little water. Sandstorms could happen, making it impossible to see. Travelers could get lost easily. They relied on finding oases, places with water in the desert, to survive. Mountains, like the Pamir Mountains in Central Asia. These mountains were very high and cold. There was much snow and ice. Paths were narrow and dangerous. People could fall. The air was thin, making it hard to breathe. Robbers. In many parts of the Silk Road, there were robbers. They hid and waited for caravans to steal their valuable goods. So, merchants had to travel in large, strong groups with guards. Wild animals. Sometimes dangerous animals lived along the paths. Sickness and disease. As we learned, diseases could travel along the route. Travelers could get sick far from home and medical help. Food and water. Finding enough food and clean water was always a big problem, especially in dry areas. Caravans had to carry much of their own supplies. Despite these many dangers, people kept traveling. Why? Because the rewards were great. They could get rich by trading. They could learn new things. And they could see the wonders of the world. What were the wonders they saw? New cultures. Travelers met people with different clothes, different languages, different foods, and different ways of living. They saw new dances, listened to new music, and heard new stories. This made their world bigger and more interesting. Amazing cities. Along the Silk Road, there were many beautiful and rich cities. These cities were like special stops. For example, Samarkand, in today's Uzbekistan, was a very famous city on the Silk Road. It was a center for trade, art, and learning. Xi'an in China was the starting point for many Eastern paths. These cities had big markets where people from many lands met. Beautiful art and buildings. Travelers saw amazing temples, mosques, and palaces with beautiful decorations that were different from their own lands. They saw new styles of art and painting, new foods. They tried new fruits, vegetables, and spices. Imagine trying tea for the first time if you were from Europe. Spreading knowledge. When merchants or monks talked, they shared ideas. They learned about new inventions, new ways to count, new ideas about the stars, and new ways to heal sickness. This knowledge slowly spread across continents. Life on the Silk Road was a mix of great danger and great discovery. It took much courage to travel. But for those who made the journey, they saw a world much bigger and more diverse than they ever imagined. They helped create a more connected world, step by step, camel by camel. It was a true adventure. Part 5. The End of the Silk Road and its Legacy Today. The Silk Road was very important for over 1,000 years. But then, it slowly started to be used less and less. It did not end suddenly. It changed over time. One main reason for its end was new ways to travel. In the 15th century, people in Europe started to build better ships. They learned to sail across the oceans. It became safer and cheaper to send goods by sea than by land. Ships could carry much more goods than camels. Ships were faster than land caravans for very long distances. Ships were often safer, as there were fewer robbers on the open sea compared to land paths. So, merchants started to use sea routes more. They sailed around Africa to reach Asia directly. This new way of trade became very popular. Because of this, the old land paths of the Silk Road became less important. The cities along the land routes became less busy. Another reason was political changes. Some big empires along the Silk Road became weaker or had wars. This made traveling on the land paths more dangerous and less organized. For example, the fall of some big empires meant there was less protection for traders. But even though the old land routes were used less, the Silk Road left a very important legacy. A legacy means something important that stays from the past. What is the legacy of the Silk Road? A connected world. The Silk Road was the first big way to connect the East and the West. It showed that different cultures could meet, trade, and learn from each other. It made the world feel smaller. Cultural exchange. It helped spread religions like Buddhism and Islam. It shared art, music, science, and ideas across continents. Many things we have today in our cultures might have roots in these old exchanges. For example, paper, gunpowder, and even some musical instruments moved along these paths. New tastes. It brought new foods and spices to different lands, changing how people ate and cooked. Imagine life without pepper or tea. Famous stories. The stories of brave travelers like Marco Polo still inspire us today. They show the spirit of adventure and discovery. Historical sites. Today, you can still visit many old cities and ruins along the former Silk Road. Places like Samarkand, Bukhara, or Xi'an have beautiful old buildings and markets that tell the story of this amazing path. These places are now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, meaning they are protected for their great importance to the world. New Silk Road ideas. Today, some countries are talking about building new roads and train lines to connect Asia and Europe again. They call this a new Silk Road. This shows that the old idea of connection and trade is still important today. In conclusion, the Silk Road was much more than just a path for silk. It was a lifeline for trade, a bridge for cultures, and a highway for ideas. It shaped the world we live in today by connecting people from different lands for many centuries. It reminds us that sharing and learning from each other is very important. It is a story of human courage, curiosity, and the desire to connect across vast distances.